Welcome to the Artist Advisory Hotline, the podcast for artists who want valuable guidance and honest answers on how to grow their careers and develop their new project from leading art world experts and artists. Here's your host and founder of the Artist Advisory, Marina Press Granger. Tune in as she gets you the answers you deserve.
Hello, artists. I'm your host, Marina Granger, and I'm just hanging out here on Saturday morning in my office having my matcha latte, which I love to make at home. It's like so therapeutic, just like doing the matcha thing. And, I stopped drinking coffee over a year and a half ago, and I never thought I would. I was the kind of person that would drink 4 cappuccinos a day. So wild. And so I just wanted to pop into my office and put together this podcast episode for you where I interviewed Bianca Bosker, who is the author of a book that I'm sure you probably read already, but if you didn't, it's called Get the Picture, a mind-bending journey among the inspired artists and obsessive art fiends who taught me how to see. Now, Bianca Bosker is a New York Times bestseller. She is a journalist, and she started a project at thinking, okay, well, she wanted to find out why art matters and what makes it good. And in doing so, she ended up working in the art world. And in doing so, she really shows us how the art world works, but not just any art world. She worked with galleries that are those types of galleries that don't accept submissions, that exhibit at some of the most amazing art fairs like NADA and Untitled. And it's sort of this very impenetrable world where you're, as an artist, you might be wondering, like, how do I get in there? And thank God you're listening to this podcast. You're in the right place. I'm here to help you with that. And so is Bianca. She's going to tell us a little bit about her experience researching for the book, working in the art world, her conclusions, and everything that she's come up with. And so I really hope that you enjoy this episode. Before we dive in, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping and give you a reminder that I am going to be opening the doors to my course, How to Know Which Galleries Are Right for You, very soon. So if you're at all interested, I really recommend that you sign up to the wait list. The link is in the show notes. And this is a course for those of you who might be wondering, how are how am I like in the world of these galleries, but they're not responding to me? Like, you might be commenting on their Instagrams, responding to their DMs. You might be friends with all the artists who show at these galleries, but somehow they're not asking you for a studio visit. They're not responding to your approach, right? To your very organic approach. Or you just don't even know where to begin when you're thinking about galleries. Maybe you are totally new to looking for a gallery and you don't want to, so to speak, bark up the wrong tree, because then you're going to be spending so much of your valuable time and energy approaching galleries that are not right for you. Or perhaps you are showing with galleries, but they're not really selling your work. Like, there's so many times when you might be putting together an entire exhibition, or you have your paintings or your other artwork in a gallery and it's just not moving and there's no traction. And it's been years, right? So perhaps you're interested in finding out which galleries are right for you and how to organically start to work with them without being cringy, without sending out emails, without making phone calls, none of that. And so that you can create an organic connection with the right galleries and get them to be a part of your world. And so I have compiled this sort of method from working with my artists for over 5 years now inside the advisory. And also from my experience working in galleries and a museum in New York City for about 15 years before I started the artist advisory. And I'll just unearth a little bit of how this will work. So, there's 7 parts to this course, and let me go through them. First, you will uh, set your intention and reset your mindset around finding a gallery. That's the first part. Then the second part will teach you about all the different types of galleries there are. The third part will teach you to understand what galleries are looking for exactly. And in this section, I teach you what the character, how to look at what a gallery is showing. What are the characteristics in that work, whether they're formal or based on subject matter or context or whatnot? And then you can compare that to your work and how it aligns with what the gallery is showing, right? Because we tend to think like, okay, let's say galleries are kind of like stores, right? They have their customers that come to them for a specific thing. And so, similarly, you might be looking at two stores that look so similar. You might be looking at, um, you know, Erewhon and Whole Foods, right? Or you might be looking at H&M and Zara and you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, these stores are so similar." But they have totally different vibes, right? And I'm going to tell you how to identify those vibes when looking at galleries and compare your vibe to what they're showing and see if that aligns. In the fourth part, I will show you some case studies of galleries, and I'm going to give you examples of how to go through this. In the fifth part, I will show you where to search for these galleries so that you're not going down this like hour-long rabbit hole, so that it feels fun for you to actually discover them, that you're not, sitting there for 15 hours doing all the googling and stuff like that. And in let's see, in the sixth part, we're going to go over what you can do to adjust your presence and how you present your work before you approach galleries. So, how are you presenting yourself online with your website, with your social media? And then finally, in the final part, in part 7, you will learn how to approach galleries in an organic way so that you're not sending unsolicited submissions, so that they're not feeling pressured, but because it's a good fit, they respond. And here's the thing, with the artists that I have implemented this method with, they there are times when they find a gallery on Instagram, they follow them right back. They create studio visits. They don't create, they go and do studio visits. Sorry, it's still kind of early for me. I'm still having my matcha. So I'm very proud of how articulated I feel today. But anyway, it has been so amazing. One artist reached out to a gallery organically without doing this cringe submission thing. And instantly, this gallery wrote back to the artist and was like, "Oh my gosh, your work is perfect. I have to show my team. I'm traveling right now, but I'll be in touch early next week." I mean, how amazing is it to get those responses so you're not like sitting there and screaming into the void? You are coming in and you're sitting in a circle where you feel like you belong. And so that's what this course is about. So if you're interested in doing this with me, you can go and sign up for the course as soon as the doors are open. They'll open at the end of this month. And you're going to have a few weeks to go through the 7 parts. And then we're going to have a live Q&A at the end of May and in June as well, so that I can be there to answer your questions. Now, this is going to have a live component, so there are limited spots. So don't wait, don't say later. It's better to know what you're dealing with now than putting it off until you're ready, right? It's better to just know what you're dealing with now so that you can do everything at your own pace, right? Instead of having to rush at the very end when you feel like you're ready and you're on the precipice and you got to go. But if you're ready, this is the course that will save you so much time. It will give you so much clarity, and I can't wait to work with you. But before we do the course, before you sign up to that wait list, I really invite you to listen to this interview with Bianca. She is so warm and so was knowledgeable and amazing. And I just, after I was listening to her audiobook for a long time, I think it's like a 15-hour audiobook. I hopped on this interview with her and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I really know you. You've been in my ear this whole time. So it was so fun to speak to her. And I can't wait for you to tune in and listen. And I hope you enjoy. So, enjoy this interview and have a wonderful weekend if you're listening to this on the weekend. And I'll see you on the other side. Hello, Bianca. It is so exciting to have you on this podcast. I have been listening to your audiobook. You are, I don't know how you did it. So thank you for coming on. Could you just tell our listeners a little bit about what you got into when you were researching your book, Get the Picture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the short answer to what it's about is that it's about the years I spent disowning my normal routine as a journalist to sell art in galleries, work in artist studios, patrol museum wings as a security guard, in bed with collectors, curators, and more, all as part of this journey to understand why does art matter and how do any of us engage with it more deeply. So I think of the book as sort of part user guide to the hidden logic of the art world and also part quest to learn how to live life more expansively. So yeah, it's a real immersive deep dive. Like I didn't just do interviews, but like I said, I went and worked in the nerve center of the fine art world to try and figure out how it would change me and what I would learn.
Wow. And early before this, you wrote a book called, what was it? It was about wine,
Cork dork.
Cork Dork.
Cork dork,
Yes.
yeah.
And in my mind, I'm like, did she do the art world? Because wine and cheese are an integral part of art openings. I'm like, maybe you were really into the wine book. But I really loved your story, like in the introduction to the book, of why you decided to dive into the art world. So could you tell us a little bit about your intention there?
Yeah, so to be totally honest, I mean, for a long time, art and I were not on speaking terms. Like I felt like I didn't know how to do art. Like I would go to openings and I just felt like everyone got the punchline except me. And I sort of took the coward's way out. I withdrew. I was like, okay, I guess I just felt so out of my league. I felt like I didn't belong. I didn't know what was going on. And it wasn't until a few years back that I was back home helping my mom clean out her basement in my childhood home in Oregon. And I came across this painting of these dancing carrots done by my late grandmother. And it was a piece that was inspired by her time as a Holocaust survivor in a displaced persons camp in Austria. And those carrots really did a number on me. Like they followed me home. They kept dancing me around this question of why she had treated art as essential, this thing that she turned to when life turned itself inside out. And I just became consumed with sort of what was I missing by turning my back on art? And so I started trying again. I was like, okay, bigger, older, wiser now. Like, let's try going to galleries and museums again. Maybe it'll go better. And I have to be honest, the art I still found very befuddling, but the people fascinated me. I'm someone obsessed with obsession, and the people I met in the art world had this magnetic passion that just pulled me in. Artists who treat paintings like they're as necessary as vital organs, gallerists who max out credit cards to show these twisted hunks of metal they swear could change the world. And I was interested that scientists are right there with artists and telling us that art is a fundamental part of our humanity, as one biologist puts it, as necessary to us as food or sex. So there's that passion that drove me in. Also, I think artists had this really expansive approach to life that made my own existence feel claustrophobic by comparison. I was at the time living really hyper optimized, New York routine that involved a lot of texting from the toilet while listening to podcasts, on 2 times speed. Some
Hi,
listeners may
hi
be doing that right
everyone.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You can hear your toilet flushing. Yeah, that was me. And I think also, to be fair, like the people I met in the art world pitied me. They told me that I lacked visual literacy, which they said was downright dangerous in a world so saturated with images. So this really kicked off for me this kind of existential questioning. I mean, I began to be really fixated by this question of whether I could see art and whether I could see the world the way these art lovers could. And so I decided that I wanted to throw myself into the center of the art world. As you know from reading the book, not a lot of people thought that was a good idea.
Yes. There, first of all, when I was going through your book, there's so many incredible tidbits of research, like actual, I don't want to say like not because your book is essentially participant observation, which is you going into the culture of the art world, into like it's almost like an anthropological study, right? And then there's another portion of the book that is supported by research that's historical. And we tend to hear these things like, oh yeah, like art is really good for health, or people buy blue paintings, not green, like not gray ones or something like that. And you actually tell us where these things come from in the book, which is so fascinating to me.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I really tried to take this like interdisciplinary approach. So yeah, it's like, I'm writing about my experience. I'm writing about the experience of the artists, the gallerists that I'm there with, and also trying to bring in history, philosophy, science. I mean, just as an example, I was while painting a white wall white at one of the galleries where I ended up working, became really interested in this question of like, why do all galleries look the same? Like, it almost feels like there's this law that mandates that if you're going to show contemporary art, it has to be in a room with white walls and very aggressive lighting. And yeah, that was just an example where that set me in a little bit of a rabbit hole to figure out like the origins of the white cube. And it turns out that it may not be here today if it weren't for the Nazis.
I know, it's so wild, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, we learn about these things tangentially. Like when I was in graduate school learning, studying art history and museology, all of these things come up, but I had to like unearth them over years and years and years. And it was such a treat to have your book and have everything kind of, all these like commonplace, like curious things. You just like directly answered. And I really love that so much. Now, when it comes to working in the art world, yeah, like everyone was like, hey, I don't know if that's a good idea. It's like, we're not sure if these people are going to let you in. And in the book, you also go about saying, like, oh, you're the enemy because you're a journalist. Oh, you're going to expose the art world. And it's one of the most unregulated industries. And as you say in the book, it's one of those places where essentially it's kind of like insider trading is okay because it's unregulated. It's one of the industries where it still happens. Now, you guys listening, I'm sure you know all the different ways that it's kind of like insider trading already. But if you want to know more, you can read the book. It's a lot to get into. My question for you here, Bianca, is out of all of this kind of like these negative emotions and these weird vibes from the art world, in your experience,
right? What were some great things that you learned about the art world? What made you feel good? What had really good vibes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that was really a big question of mine at the outset. I mean, as you alluded to, like, I started embarking and trying to just talk to people in the art world as a journalist. And yeah, as you said, I got threats, warnings. People told me that, this was not a good idea if I wanted to keep living in New York City. I really felt like an FBI agent trying to get in with the mob. And that was surprising to me. I think based on everything that the art world advertises about itself, I expected to find, this group of people just excited to bring in more people and welcome them with open arms. And yeah, I did, as I started working at galleries, begin to understand the way that there is a strategic snobbery that the art world uses to keep people out. And in some cases, and in some parts of the art world, it can be very deliberate. There can be these deliberately erected barriers to entry that exist to build mystique, to concentrate power in the hands of gatekeepers, to maintain this idea of the art world as being this exclusive purview for a self-anointed few. And I don't agree with that. But I think to your point, when I started having conversations, I was disheartened by how down on the art world everyone was. Like people were like, oh, it's a train wreck. It's a fucking horror. It's a con. It's a mess. Like, get out while you can. And I kind of felt like, guys, but surely there's something here worth celebrating, right? I mean, people are sacrificing so much to participate in this world, to run galleries, to make work, to just be around it and exist with it. And I will say that having, now spent many years immersed in the art world, I think there's so much to celebrate. There's so much about it that's great. That doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. I think one of the things that I really love is the extent to which the art world reminds us that anything is possible. As a writer, it was really interesting to to spend time with artists and sort of compare the different ways that we would approach our craft. And for me, this was, as I alluded to before, this was a journey about developing my eye, about learning to not just look in art's direction, but actually see it and converse with it. And also this journey to try and live life more expansively. And I think that there were ways in which I think I succeeded, but also in the process bumped up against new limits that now I'm like itching to move beyond. And work is a really good example. It's like as a journalist, when I want to write a story, right, I have to like go and pitch to an editor. I have to, convince them that like there's a news angle, right? It has to be a certain length. An editor ends up working with me on it and, being able to offer all this feedback. And artists have this ability, like if they're interested in something, like they go for it, like they jump into it, they can explore this world. And there's a part of me that really envies that freedom and would love to figure out how to incorporate more of that. I worked with the artist Julie Curtis, and I remember describing to her the process through which I worked with an editor on a story, and they would like offer me edits and feedback, and then I'd have to go back with them a new draft. And she like looked at me with this look of abject horror where she was like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. This idea of having other people mucking around in your process. And I think when I say that kind of anything is possible in the art world reminds us of that, I'm also talking on a really fundamental level about what art does for us as viewers and individuals. When I started this, I think I felt like art was a luxury. I mean, it can't like feed you, house you, or be used to kill predators. Like when we hear about art, so often we're hearing about these big prices and these like fancy things. And it felt sort of disconnected from our daily necessities. And having gone through this and having spent so much time with artists and also with scientists, I have become really convinced that art is essential. It is a fundamental part of our humanity. And one argument for why it is so essential that really resonated with me is that art helps us fight the reducing tendencies of our minds. Scientists and artists have both come to this answer from scientists and artists have both arrived at this answer in different ways. But what I'm trying to say is like, when you think about it, when we look at the world, right, we don't see the world like cameras, right, or video cameras. Like we're not accurately, objectively recording the scenes around us. Vision is a hallucination. Like the reality that we think we're seeing and inhabiting is very much a construction of our brains and our expectations. Like our brains are these trash compactors. And when we look out at the world, we have these filters of expectation that descend and they preemptively prioritize, dismiss, organize all the raw data coming in even before we get the full picture.
Yeah,
And so
it's our reticular activating system. It's our confirmation bias, right? Like if
totally.
we think we're going to find, I always think of this like when people are dating, I'm like, if my girlfriends are like, oh, everyone sucks, I'm like, if you think everyone you're dating sucks, they're gonna,
Right,
right?
totally.
Yeah.
But I think art, and so there's an argument that art functions like dreams. Like we assume so much about the world is fixed, and art reminds us that that is not the case. It sort of forces our brains out of their well-worn pathways. It introduces a glitch in a way that is ultimately a gift to us,
Mhm.
and helps us yank off that filter of expectation. And in the process, we can learn more, we can experience more, we can see more, we can discover beauty where we never did before. And there's scientists that argue that art is really, there's scientists that argue that art has been crucial to our survival as a species. And so, yeah, I just think that on so many levels, there really is so much to celebrate about art. And not only that, but there are so many reasons that we should all make it a greater part of our diet as human beings. Now, I
Yeah.
mean, I think there's ways in which the art world could probably help us do that, but there's also ways in which we can help
So
ourselves.
interesting, so insightful. And I wonder though, when Julie Curtis she was listening to you speak about how structured the journalistic process is, right? Like it's so structured. And the art world feels so unstructured, right? And there are artists who really thrive in that because they are pursuing their careers in a creative way. They really embrace like anything can happen in the art world. And so, yeah, that is so beautiful about the art world. And so, just like believing and seeing the positivity in it, I think it's a really great thing. It's like what you were saying,
Yeah.
we can choose to see what we want to see, right?
Yeah. I also get the ways in which it's frustrating, to be frank. I think there's also like, I remember working with a gallerist who was like, oh, artists are scared of contracts. Like you should, you don't want to like drop a contract because artists just like, sort of implied like they'll run screaming in the other direction. And there's a part of me that was like, dude, this feels like a business relationship in which a contract could protect both parties. And in fact, by not having one, you may benefit more than the artist. So I just think I
Yeah.
think there's pros and cons to that. Or even like it's sort of crazy to me that, no unsolicited submissions come standard issue on every gallery
Mhm.
website. I
Mhm.
mean, that kind of feels counter to one of the things I love about art, which is the way that it encourages us to see art in so many places where we might not have expected it before. I think artists are really good at doing that. Some of the gatekeepers, perhaps less so.
Yeah. So speaking of
A present
those,
company accepted, of course. It's a
yeah.
lovely story. I love it. It's wonderful to know that that happens.
Well, thank you. I'm like, I don't know. I don't even consider myself a gatekeeper anymore. But and I think one of the beautiful things, one of the ways that I do what I do, and I can just kind of say whatever and do whatever is because I'm not working in galleries anymore. I'm done. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like, can all come out. So I wanted to ask you this, in that age old kind of paradox. How do you get into galleries that don't accept submissions?
Yeah.
Right. And in your experience, you've worked at two galleries in the book, right? You explain you've worked at 315, which was run by Jack Barrett, and then Denny Dimon, which is now two separate galleries. You also worked as a studio assistant for Julie Curtis. You worked as a gallery guide at the Guggenheim, which is like a
Security. It's a nice
hybrid,
name for a security guard. Yeah.
yeah, that you should talk to,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah. And so did I cover all the jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I worked, with some other artists along the way. You know, like shadowed curators and collectors, ended up working at art fairs, selling art. But yeah, that's a good summary. Yeah.
So out of this experience, and also I'm curious to know, in my mind, I was like, well, how long was it that you were in there? I'm like, when was Time and Read closing? And then I'm like, oh, I don't. I'm like doing my timeline in my head, and I'm like, what was that spring break or what was that Untitled that looked like a giant nose or whatever it was? What was the timeline that you worked in the art world there?
Yeah, so I started like embarking on the journey that became Get the Picture in 2018.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then I guess towards the end of the book, it's like when the pandemic starts, like March 15th, 2020.
Right. And then the research, evolved. I mean, I was still doing research, obviously, but it just like in different forms, and also filling out trying to, let's say, delve into some of the like academic writing that I felt like I needed to read, even if I don't quote it directly, in order to write with authority. So yeah, it was, and the research just took different forms at different points. But yeah, I mean, even now it's like I've been on the
Yeah.
book tour, Forget the Picture, and I've been doing studio visits while I've been, on
Mhm.
different stops, which has been really
So
fun.
cool. So with all of that experience and all of that research behind you, can you tell us if there is a pattern that you're seeing to a roadmap of how an artist can go from wanting to be an artist to being successful, working in galleries, showing in art fairs with these galleries? Is there like a common denominator? What is your take on it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I have the answer right now that I'm going to share with everyone. So listen up. It's very simple, actually. No, I'm just kidding.
The $1 million
Yeah, right.
question
Yeah.
right here, right now.
Yeah. If only. Look, I think, you know, it is confusing and it's a mess. And I think, I will tell you that that was a question that I had. I mean, when I embarked on it, and one question that I had was precisely that. How does an artwork go from being this germ of an idea in someone's studio all the way through to being this cultural icon that we obsess over in museums? And I was interested in teasing apart that process because I felt like all the decisions that shape an artwork are ultimately decisions that shape us, right? Our idea of what art is, who makes it, why we should engage with it. And that was part of my rationale for really inserting myself into the middle of the action. Yeah, I wanted to know, like, why does an artist pick this color green? Why does a gallerist pick this photographer to show instead of that one? And I will tell you that what was really striking and disheartening to me at the outset was when I started talking with artists, I was struck by, even though they'd spent years longer in this world than I have, and even though they had so much more at stake, they couldn't answer these questions either, and this felt like really hard-won knowledge. It also felt like deliberately opaque knowledge, and it just felt kind of broken to me that this industry made it so mysterious for people to figure out how they made a career in this industry. It's almost like if you're trying to become a corporate lawyer, but like, it takes you 5 years to figure out you have to pass the bar, And but even then, I mean, I think part of the problem is that there isn't a single answer. I think another piece of it that I found a bit surprising and also off-putting was the extent to which people's judgment of the artwork in the really influential parts of the fine art world really had very little to do with the art itself. And so, people would look at a piece and instead of talking about the work, they would ask, like, where did the artist go to school? What gallery has shown their work? Who owns it? Who is this person sleeping with? Who are their friends? And that so-called context, right? That
What's
web
their
of names.
sexual orientation? In some cases, who knows? Yeah.
Right. And that context, right? That sort of social capital of the artist, the sort of web of names around of the artist, all of that seemed to influence people's opinions of the work so much more than the actual piece itself. And as I said, I was really trying to develop my eye. I was trying to develop visual literacy. And I was really frustrated by that answer. I mean, it felt like I was being encouraged to sort of outsource my opinion to the hive mind. As you said before, I'd written this book, Cork Dork, that was about sort of my experience training as a sommelier and trying to understand like what is the big deal about wine. And as part of training as a som, you spend a ton of time blind tasting wine. So it's like you have a glass of wine in front of you, you don't know anything about it, and you have to figure out like what grape was it made with, where was it from, when was it made, all these things about it just based on smelling and tasting it. And what was interesting about that process is in the course of doing that, like you really have to trust your own experience. Like you cannot pay attention to all these things that play to our biases. And I felt like in the art world, I had this experience, this very intense culture shock where I was essentially being told to do the opposite. It was like, no, like what you're experiencing can't be trusted. What you need to understand the work is all this external thing, all this information that I had thought was totally irrelevant to having an experience of the work. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is in terms of artists' careers and making it, I'd be lying if I said that context doesn't have a finger on the scale. I worked with a couple different gallerists who really prioritized having an MFA, for example, and even more so having an MFA from a very small number of institutions. That being said, there are a million exceptions to every rule. And I guess like there's something to be said for just sheer perseverance in the face of adversity. And that's not advice I give lightly. I mean, I was really focused in this book on emerging artists, and it was disheartening in the course of my research to find that many of these artists were really submerging. It's like it's hard. I acknowledge like it seems I haven't done it firsthand, but like just having spoken to and worked with so many artists, it is clear that it is very difficult to spend, all day working at your 1, 2, 3 jobs just so you can go home and do the work you really want to do and juggle your studio rent and your own rent. But also, I think if there's one thing I took away, it's that I think for many artists, there is this deep wisdom in that making it can mean a lot of different things, right? Making it can mean being able to support yourself fully off of your work. Making it can mean being able to make art in your day-to-day life. I think for many artists, they describe being an artist less as a choice than just a state of being. And so I guess with the book, like I really tried to chronicle, though, the different paths that I saw people take and the advice I saw people give, for better or for worse. And I think, a big advice was basically like, go out and meet people, talk to everyone, show up at every opening, sort of kill yourself, introducing yourself to people, making small talk. And I'm not saying I love that advice. It feels like it really favors people who are extroverts or social or have the luxury of the time to spend their evenings out at openings. But, I think I tried to, as much as possible in the book, offer the roadmap as I saw it presented to me in the course of working at galleries and in the course of working with artists.
Yeah. One thing that I was thinking about that was really, I feel like you alluded to in your book, is there are so many different pockets of the art world. There's so many different types of art worlds out there. And there's a particular kind of art world that exhibits at Untitled and NADA, right? There's another type of art world that exhibits at Frieze and the Art Basel. And it's another type of art world that exhibits at like Art Miami or something like that. And it's so interesting because there's no essential prescribed roadmap. I always say to like the artists that I work with, whatever your goal is, think of it like the center of a spider web. Like there's so many different ways to get there because there are, right? And
Yeah.
anything can happen. So, speaking of anything can happen, when I was reading your book, there were some really interesting work behaviors, right? Like in the art world. It felt like there was a very blurred line between work-life balance and things like that. And it felt a little bit toxic. I'm wondering if you found any toxic behaviors working in the art world and how you managed.
Yeah. Well, I will answer that. I think there was one more thing just to add to what we were talking before, which is, first of all, I do want to give some people some reassurance that not everyone lives and dies by context. Like I ended up co-curating a show with Elizabeth Denny when I worked at what was then Denny Dimon Gallery. And, she's someone who really prides herself on staying in the work. When she was selling art, she tried to keep people in the work. She didn't jump immediately to talking about an artist's resume or, who had collected her work. And when we co-curated this show together, I was really struck by the fact that like when I proposed artists for the show, she made up her decision about whether to include them based on seeing the work before she'd even glanced at their resumes, and that to me was really exciting and encouraging to see that like there are people out there, and there are many people out there, a lot of great people out there who have their own conscience, who have their own like just trust their own visual compass. And I'll also say that I do believe that it's not only up to artists to do the work in regards to fixing this or just trying to wrestle with this flawed system as it is. I think that we as viewers also have a responsibility to help by exercising our eye. And what I mean by that is that, I don't know, I hope that the book is sort of a rallying cry and maybe a roadmap in some cases for people to really develop their own eye, to challenge their taste, to kind of get outside their visual comfort zone and expand their boundaries when it comes to art. I mean, I think the art would be better off if a lot of us thought more for ourselves, if we placed a bit less stock in context. I'm really hopeful that if more of us exercise our eye, we could support a greater diversity of artists, of art making styles, of forms of expression. So I keep telling people, it's like, I worked as a guard at a museum. I believe that museums can offer up incredible artistic experiences. I also believe that we would all stand to benefit if we spent maybe a little less time with the so-called masterpieces and more time, seeing art in basements, in studios, in art schools. If we sought out underappreciated works, under-celebrated works. Part of developing our eye means challenging our tastes and exposing ourselves to new things. And also, I'm hopeful in the process, people might say like, wow, like just discover new artists and support them in the process. But yes, going back to your question about toxicity, I don't think it will
Wait,
shock you.
I wanted to pause before we go into toxic
Yeah.
because you were talking there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a business idea for you. Have you ever thought about doing a series of travel-based retreats called Exercise Your Eye, where you take a group of potential art lovers and you
Yeah.
take them to see art wherever, right? Like in Venice or I don't know. That would be so cool.
It'd be so fun. No, I love it.
I'm ready. I'm signing up.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, I've never really thought of myself as a guru, but like, I mean, I'll think about it.
I just
It'd be
when you said exercise your eye, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
ding, business idea. I don't know. I'm like, that's my pastime. One of my hobbies is to think of random business ideas.
I love it. I
know.
love it. I need to do more of that. I love it. But yeah, so you're right. I mean, so I think your question was around like, did I experience toxicity and how do you
Yes.
find a way
Uh-huh.
around it or sort of,
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
How
yeah,
did you manage it? How did you deal with it? I mean, you also like in the, I don't remember if this was in the beginning of the book or where it was, but you mentioned, or even in our conversation today, you mentioned that somebody like threatened you. And oh my gosh, the moment I heard that somewhere, I think it was in the book, I was like, oh my God, me too. I actually had my life threatened by a dealer
Oh
before.
my God.
And now, and here
What
we
a
are.
rite of passage, a
Yeah.
twisted rite of passage.
So weird.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think there were moments that were really tough. I mean, I'm grateful for them because I learned a lot, really. And I think, what I experienced was nothing in comparison to what a lot of people experience. I mean, I had my, it was suggested that I needed a makeover. I was not, and I quote, the coolest cat in the art world. So this was a gallerist told me this. He told me, I was not the coolest cat. You're not the coolest cat in the art world. So having you around is just like lowering my coolness. But like I
And
spoke with
other
people.
phrases.
But I spoke with people, who'd been threatened with like letter openers that had things thrown at them. You know, they had all kinds of horrible things said to them. I mean, people who, you know, were basically, you know, totally exploited. I mean, you know, or even, you know, I remember, you know, someone who had worked as an intern at a gallery, and like, you know, she described having to, she was at this point homeless, and you know, she had to sneak out and shoplift food, you know, to eat lunch basically. And it was like, you know, this is an art gallery, right? Like this is a place that could presumably, you know, is selling, I presume, expensive objects to wealthy people, and yet that's crazy that that's going on in your business. But look, I think that there were moments that were, as I said, tough. And I think, you know, moments where I really was uncomfortable. But look, I think that there are those pockets of the art world, and it would be naive to pretend like they don't exist. I also felt really lucky that through enough conversations, through enough knocking on doors, through enough really awkward attempts at small talk with strangers at openings, I was able to find a group of people who were A, very welcoming, and B, who really believed in helping more people love art. You know, they just wanted to bring more people into this world. They wanted to involve more people in what they were doing, whether it was making art, showing it, selling it. And they were not only, you know, really welcoming to me, but also just had this expansive idea of what art could do for us if given half a chance. And so I think, you know, I think that there is a community for everyone in the art world. I do think so. I mean, I want to believe so. And I'm really struck by how often I hear from artists, especially since the book came out, that they are searching for community, that they feel a bit adrift. And, you know, part of me like wants to like put them all together on a group chat and just be like, talk to each other, discuss. And I will confess, like, God, it's awkward. Like it can be like, I mean, I really just threw myself into the art world. I didn't know anybody, I didn't know anything. And I really did spend a lot of time basically forcing myself on people, you know, just like talking to someone that looked relatively alone at an opening. And like I said, it isn't easy. I mean, it would take me like, you know, like, I don't know, like that half an hour of pep talk and like, you know, 6 minutes of breathing exercises to show up solo at an opening, you know? So,
Yeah.
but I do think a lot of the artists that I know that have sort of found their footing in the art world have also done it just by sort of linking hands with like-minded people. And that could be, if you're an artist, like exchanging studio visits. It could start with like exchanging comments on an Instagram post. I know that's happened for many people I spoke to. But I'd like to believe that like your sort of artistic soulmate is out there somewhere. Maybe that's like overly Pollyanna, but you know, like this is a world where this is a world that brings people to it, not because they have to be there, but because they care, but because they believe so strongly in making art a part of their lives and other people's lives that they just can't fathom being anywhere else. And so I think that is a great common ground on which to strike up a conversation.
I love that. I thought that was such a great piece of advice to talk to anyone who looks remotely alone at an opening. And another thing that I always tell artists that you mentioned in the book, don't ever, you know, when you're at an opening, if you're an artist, don't show anyone your work unless they're asking, right? Like it's not your opening. That's another thing. That was really good. So
Well, that
anyway.
would but see, I don't know. I always love it. I love seeing people's work. I always ask them to see their work, but like, yeah, I just thought it was, I don't know. I was a little frustrated. I had, yeah, as I write about in the book, this episode where this, you know, gallerists had given the advice to artists, like go to an opening, like you got to talk to people, you got to network, like that's the only way you get ahead. And then when there was an artist in an opening trying to do exactly that, it felt like it was sort of being held against her. And I was like, what are artists supposed to do here, man?
Yeah.
Like it just feels like a catch-22. So I don't know. I just feel like there are rules, but also like this is the art world. Isn't the point that isn't the reason that we're all here is because like we want to break the rules? So
Yeah.
Man.
Let's break some rules. So, speaking of rule breaking, Bianca, what is in the future for you? You have done so well getting into the art world, working in it, being successful. What's your next project? Are you going to stick around in the art world? What's in the future for you?
Yeah, I wish I knew exactly what my, plans were. I mean, I think my relationship with art now couldn't be more different from what it was when I started. I mean, I feel like I crave art on a physical level now. And as I said, like it's continued to be a huge part of my life. Like when I've been traveling on book tour, like, going to galleries, going to studios, going to museums. Um, I think art is, I hope, like a lifelong passion of mine. I mean, like it's an exciting world where things are constantly changing. There's always something new to be discovered. I also love this idea that the artist Julie Curtis sort of introduced me to, which was that taste doesn't have to be a destination. I think too many of us treat taste as an identity. Like we have to find the right taste, we have to like the right things, and then we get really stuck in our taste. And instead, there's this, I think, wonderful idea of as looking at taste as a journey. With taste comes a new self. Is something that Julie kind of drilled into me, and nicely. I mean, actually, is something that Julie once said to me. And so I kind of love that idea that art allows us to keep discovering new facets of the world, but also new facets of ourselves, of questioning our ideas, our outlook, of hijacking and of lifting that filter of expectation. Yeah, there's a couple of articles that I'm working on, and then we'll see. I don't know.
I love that. Bianca, that is so cool. So I also love to ask some of the guests on this podcast some like random personal questions because I want to get to know who you are, right? So wondering, what is your sign?
I'm a Libra.
Oh, so
Yeah.
balanced. I love that.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone in my life would agree with that, but
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know if balance is the word that has typically been applied to me. But nonetheless, yes, like, it is my astrological sign, so I can't move away from that.
I love that. It's so funny. One of the artists that I worked with for ages, and she also, just like when you were working with All Fire,
Yeah.
she's also like she her name's Leah Schrager, and she created this like online persona. It was about 7 years ago now. She created a persona where she was like a sexy Instagram model, and it was like her kind of like performance projects. And since then, that sexy Instagram model has like over 5 million followers, which is so wild. So she is a Libra. So hi, Leah. I don't know if you're listening. Libra Town here. And we had another Libra on the podcast who is Victoria Fry, and she has her own podcast too. She's from the Visionary Art Collective. So that's kind of cool. Anyway,
It's amazing. I
Libras.
know. Yeah, no, I know Leah's work. Yeah, definitely very relevant to.
Yes,
Yes.
the Belfies.
Yes,
Belfie
the
vibes.
Belfies. Yes, yes. The butt selfies. Your listeners are, I'm sure, too, far
Oh,
too erudite, but
if they don't know what a Belfie is, they can Google it. I love that. Okay. And what are some of your favorite like TV shows to watch? Do you even get a chance to watch TV?
Oh, I do. Although it like will take me at this rate, it takes me like a full week to finish an episode because I like pass out at the end of the night. So I have to confess that the TV show that I have been really enjoying at the moment is the original Perry Mason. It is black and white. It's like the proto Law and Order, like, basically the episodes divided into like, doing the sort of, figuring out who did it and all that. And then it ends with the courtroom drama. And anyway, it features a lot of like, beautiful blonde divas that have been, unfairly accused of murdering people. But it's like kind of wonderful. I don't know. I feel like there's like a real tightness to old TV that doesn't exist as much in the age of streaming, where they're just happy for you to spend as much time as possible on the platform.
Ah, I love that. Perry Mason, the original. That is
Yeah,
so cool.
just such a
Um,
crank.
it really is, but it's also so, when was that if it's black and white, I guess was in the 50s or something like that?
1957, I think, is when it started.
So lately I've been watching I Dream of Jeannie, which is like
Ooh,
from the 60s.
yeah.
And it's so wild how women are portrayed in that age. Like, wow,
Yeah.
you
I
know.
have not seen it recently, but yeah.
So
Um,
yeah, lots of damsel in distress vibes.
right.
Oh, so interesting. Cool. And then one other thing, which is kind of, like if you were going to go, so to speak, off the record, which ironically, like you can't because you're on a podcast, right? But if you were going to go off the record and you would just give one piece of advice to an artist who's listening, who maybe they don't even like, they're really just starting out. They don't live in a major city. They have these dreams of having their work shown in a beautiful gallery in like New York City or LA. What's that one piece of advice that you would give them?
Mm.
No pressure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that I do think that like befriending other artists is a really great place to start. And I think that that can happen in your own town or city, but you can also begin to, but you could also allow that process to happen digitally or remotely, I mean, um, like I think that a lot of gallerists love repeating, like it's this trade secret that their favorite way of finding artists is through other artists. And I think that befriending other artists is a way to probably improve your own work, right? You could like exchange studio visits. I think it's also a way to share knowledge, and sort of figure out like, okay, like how did you get this? How did you get that? I think it's also probably an easier way to begin to build your community than trying to get the attention of a gallerist who, like I said, tends to sort of adopt the stance of like no unsolicited submissions. Yeah, and also like, that friendship, that relationship could open up who knows what pathways in the future. So I think that is probably a good place to start. I think also like just on a sort of basic level, I think making it easy for people to see your work, right? And that could mean just having a website or having a social media account. I've been lucky enough to receive a lot of really wonderful emails from artists who've read my book, and most of them include like an email signature with a link to their website. And I always click on the link and I always go and look at the work. And who knows what will come of that, but I've had this wonderful engagement with their work. Like they have just shared it, and that's really exciting.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah.
so beautiful, Bianca. Thank you so much. And so, for everyone who's at the edge of their seat, they can't wait to read your book because for some reason they haven't read it already. Where can they get your book? Where can they get to know a little bit more about you as well?
Yeah, so the book is called Get the Picture. It is nonfiction. You can find it on audiobook, ebook, physical paper book. You can find it online, Amazon, bookshop.org, your amazing, awesome local indie bookstore that would love to see you and have your support. My website is biancabosker.com and my Instagram is bbosker. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you for all you do to support artists and viewers. And huge thanks to all of your listeners that are artists for what they do.
Thank you so much for listening. Support your community by sharing this podcast, leaving a review, and follow The Artist Advisory on Instagram at @the_artist_advisory, and visit us online at www.theartistadvisory.com.